Anyway, we're not talking about mustaches today.
It is not a mustache day.
We're talking about PF and Digitorum Brevis. What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 16 of the Past Your Prime podcast. As you can see, we've got a new setup and a new logo, which I think is pretty cool. Just made that today. See if it sticks.
You really wanted the volleyball player to be
Yeah.
as part of the logo, so you guys are welcome. This is a picture of an old person playing volleyball.
Looks like they're shirtless, too. I like that. Anyway, episode 16. I'm Alex, professional volleyball player, enormous calves, great voice. This is Craig. Say something, Craig.
I'm Craig. I have more normal-sized calves than Alex. I think mine are actually shaped more correctly for my body. I don't have a weirdly large calf structure, but they do look nice. Like you said, I'm a physical therapist. I do some consulting in healthcare. I made that sound
He's
so
not good at
poorly.
intros.
I'm not good at intros. I own a few clinics and some gyms. So
Alrighty, let's jump into our favorite segment, injury updates with Alex and Craig.
hit it.
You go first.
I feel great. I had been struggling with a neck issue. It's dramatically better, basically healed. And then everything else in my body feels fantastic. I did have a little bit of a tweak with my low back with boxing, but it's fully recovered. I'm back to crushing life.
Yeah, much worse than last week. My wrist hurts because I played sports yesterday. I deadlifted this week, the most I've deadlifted in probably like 5 years, and that made my back hurt,
102 pounds?
give or take. Probably,
It's quite a bit heavier, right?
yeah.
It's a heavy number.
I hit 315 for 3. I was just feeling really good. I was like, why not? Why not move up 50 pounds in one quick setting?
Just so you know, it's a terrible decision. I think you can hear sometimes when he gives explanations on his workouts that you can see why he has
So many injuries.
and horrible responses.
Yeah.
There we go.
My wrist is a little bit sore today just from playing yesterday. My TFL is flaring up again.
How's your shoulder?
I used a lot of Tiger Balm yesterday, so my shoulder feels pretty all right.
He was saying that it looked like he was doing something inappropriate when he was rubbing the Tiger Balm on his TFL.
I should not have done that in the gym.
Did you get weird looks?
No, there was only like 3 people in there at the time, so I think I was safe from the judgment of why I'm vigorously rubbing inside of my pants.
Yeah. There's times where we teach people how to do self-massage treatment, and there's these tendon injuries that you can get on your inner thigh. And
It wasn't that bad. I'm like on the outer side.
yeah, you're on the outer side. People are still going, with that mustache, there might be something going on here.
It's fake. Just peel it right off.
Actually, that would creep me out.
That's my joke. I say that all the time. I'm like, great mustache. I'm like, it's fake. Anyway, we're not talking about mustaches today.
It is not a mustache day.
We're talking about PF and Digitorum Brevis.
You clearly came up with the topic.
Yeah, I'm not as into feet as you are.
I am a foot guy.
Right.
I love how we developed our feet. If we look at it from like an anthropology perspective, I love how injuries are so tightly related to walking gait, how you walk. It's fascinating to me that it's an area of the body where the load and the forces that have to go through the joints and the tissues and tendons, it's so specific to like our structure, how we're able to handle those different demands on the foot. The foot is just one of the to me one of the most incredible areas on our body, and the way that your foot handles the different forces and stresses going through it lead to very characteristic injuries. So it's when I first started my first practice, I built a lot of my physical therapy around treating the foot.
Good for you. So today's topic is the 7 signs your heel pain is not coming from your plantar fasciitis. Or plantar fascia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we talked about the fascia a couple episodes ago.
The idea is that a good amount of the time, I find it to be what's called the Flexor Digitorum Brevis.
The F FDB. So we'll probably refer to it as the FDB a couple of times because I'm not saying that a bunch of times today.
You're not going to say Flexor Digitorum Brevis?
Flexor Digitorum Brevis.
Well, he does make it sound smarter
Flexor Digitorum Brevis.
with a little bit of the hand thing happening.
All right. Very cool. So we're going to kind of go over the 7 different signals or signs that kind of lead away from it being PF or plantar fasciitis. So give me the story of chronic heel pain. We were talking about this at the beginning of the episode because I'm relatively stupid when it comes to these things. I don't know anything about the foot. I just come to Craig when the top of my foot hurts and he's like, I'll just pull on it. It'll be fine. We're talking about the heel and heel pain. And I thought plantar fasciitis was like the middle of your foot hurts, but it's generally like your heel.
That's a good intro. So the chronic foot pain, the pain that you get right at the base of your heel, it's the number one thing that I treat on the foot. And when somebody comes in, it's often been something that they've had for a really long time. They may come with an image where they've done imaging with their podiatrist or their physician, and it'll show that there's thickening of the plantar fascia itself, or there'll be a heel spur. If we're looking at the bottom of the foot, this is your calcaneus. This is typically where you see the fat pad sitting on top of it, and you can see this kind of edge.
Yeah, it's like a hook.
It looks like a little hook. The structures on the foot, bottom of the foot, your plantar fascia and your flexor digitorum brevis, both connect here. And the pull on the bone actually causes the bone to basically look like it develops a hook, but it's not. It's just the tractioning force. It's not as if this bone is poking into your muscle. It's just not what's happening. Now, when people come in with this chronic pain, they're coming in with typically they've already tried some level of treatment. The most common ones you hear will be taking a ice bottle, rolling the bottom of your foot on it,
like a water bottle frozen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Have you tried that?
No, I don't need to.
You've never had it. I mean, it's actually surprising when he hasn't had one of the injuries that we're going to talk about. So I can see how I get confused and don't remember.
You remember everything. You like weirdly remember everything to the point where I'm like, you're being kind of creepy right now.
Yeah. I have like little videos that I watch of it. No, there oftentimes these people have seen numerous providers. They've read, okay, hey, use this. They'll also have these exercises, towel pickups, marble pickups. They'll have done the Strasbourg sock.
Are you saying like pick up marbles with your toes? This is just
Getting weirder and
getting weirder and weirder.
The other thing that you'll see often is this thing called Strasbourg sock, where they put it on and it pulls their foot back.
And I've seen you
Like
tape
this.
people like that before.
Different taping.
Different taping.
Yes,
Okay.
they literally they put it on at night and they'll be laying down and this sock will pull them into this dorsiflex position.
That'd just be terrible for my calf.
I'm actually surprised. Oh, it would be terrible for your calf. It would light you up. I have definitely seen people who use that where they develop nerve pain afterwards, and oftentimes it actually gets associated with their original injury. And we won't dive into the nerve component of this type of a problem, but needless to say, what I think happens when people have this, obviously, when they have this heel issue that's not healing, they're doing things that they think are for the plantar fascia. The first thing that hits my head is it's probably not plantar fascia. I believe it's one of the diagnoses that we have a lot of. We have a lot of research that says that plantar fascia is a huge problem that causes a lot of people pain. I actually think it's not that common. I often think it's more often the flexor digitorum brevis, the FDB, the tendon, or the muscle belly itself that's actually causing the pain.
So kind of my prerequisite feeling about plantar fasciitis was actually kind of true. You're not generally, if it's heel pain, more likely than not, it's the FDB rather than it actually being heel pain.
In my opinion, it's that flexor digitorum brevis is actually causing the heel pain.
But the default kind of diagnosis would be plantar fasciitis.
Plantar fasciitis. And what I'd like to go through today is that there's clinical signs, things that we'll do that really point it towards it being a muscle, this really strong muscle on the bottom of your foot. Now, heel pain can actually be caused by a whole bunch of different structures. And just to name a few, it can be your back. You can have an S1 referral from your low back that actually causes heel pain. You can have a fat pad injury or a fat pad atrophy. your abductor hallucis, digiti minimi, ADM. You can also have nerve, tarsal tunnel syndrome. You can have the medial lateral plantar nerve, a Baxter's neuropathy. You can have a stress fracture. There's a lot of different structures, but if I had to say, I find flexor torn brevis to be the one that's the most common.
Okay, so let's talk about the 7 signs that say it is the FDB. What are the 7 signs that says it is the flexor digitorum brevis?
The 7 signs. Well, the very first one is cramping in your foot. The plantar fascia is a passive structure. It dynamizes at certain portions of the walking gait, but it's not an actual muscle. If you're getting cramping on the bottom of your foot, and the way it'll present is actually different between people. It can feel like a normal cramp. Have you ever had a cramp before?
Many cramps.
And
lots of bananas. I eat lots of bananas for the cramps.
What did that cramp feel like?
Generally speaking, it's been my calf. And I mean, that muscle just tenses up. My foot gets stuck in a weird position and I can't move it. And I cry a lot.
Such a crier. Everybody has experienced a cramp at some point in their life. The foot cramp, what I have found people will describe it as, their foot will feel almost as if their toes curl down and they can't relax them. Like they're pitched down. Sometimes they won't even notice the muscle belly, which is at the very bottom of the foot, which we'll describe in a second. They won't even feel pain there. It'll just feel like their toes get locked down.
I felt that a couple of times when doing like Bulgarian split squats.
Yes, that's actually a common way. Back in 2018, I had some stuff happen that pulled me out of a research study that we've been developing. But one of the ways that we would induce a cramp in the flexor digitorum brevis is we would put a electrode on the person's flexor digitorum brevis, and then we put them in that position, and we'd shoot the electrode on, which is very uncomfortable, and we would induce the cramp by making their toes curl down, and then try to hold that bottom position. We call that active insufficiency. Your muscle's not good at firing when it's fully contracted, right? That's the easiest way for you to cramp. If you wanted to cramp your hamstring right now, the easiest way to do it is to pull your heel to your butt and then try to get your hamstring to turn on at that point. The easiest way to cramp your calf is to point your toe down and then try to fire it. Like those are active insufficiency. It's one of the most common causes for cramping beyond a potassium imbalance. And I'd actually say that in altered neuromuscular states, the most common reason people cramp, but we can go into why cramps happen and actually how to handle those in a future episode, because I do have a very strong opinion on it. But if you feel cramping on the bottom of your foot with the FDB, what we found is it mimics the primary complaints of plantar fascia pain.
Okay, so you're saying if you have a cramp down there, it's not the fascia?
It's absolutely not the fascia.
Okay.
It's a structure that does not, it's a structure that has no muscle in it, the plantar fascia. Plantar fascia is a passive structure that our body uses to optimize walking gait. When you get into certain positions in walking gait, that's when the plantar fascia gets tightened. That's not when most people explain the pain, which we'll hit in a second, but there's no muscle piece to the plantar fascia. So if you feel cramping, if you have where that toes, like you're not able to pull them up, that almost like feeling like your muscles are pulling your foot down, that's a cramp, and that's already leading you down a pathway that sounds more muscular tendinous. Absolutely not the pathway of it being the plantar fascia.
This is kind of off topic and a small side quest, but like, why do athletes get this type of pain?
What do you mean by that?
Like, I hear a lot of basketball players get plantar fasciitis.
The very first thing is that most individuals lose the spring behavior of their foot. And what I mean by that is the bigger you are, the higher the stresses and forces that are going to go through your leg, the more physically active you are. What I find happens is these individuals, they produce a level of force that the foot can't absorb nor continue to act like a spring, and that causes the muscle to become dysfunctional. And then they'll do things on top of it that actually predispose cramping to happen. For example, a really common one is they'll lose strength, what's called your posterior tibialis. They'll start to dominate with their flexor digitorum longus, and you have this kind of combination of stuff where muscles that aren't the best at doing certain things, I call it a synergistic dominance. So you have muscles that should be working together at certain loads, And then what actually happens is one starts to dominate, and that one that starts to dominate starts to cramp.
Sorry for the side quest there, and you
But it-
nerded out hard on it.
And we can totally go down if people are interested. We can do if you have cramping. It's a really fun. It's fun because I often think when people get repetitive cramping, it has nothing to do at all with electrolytes. It has nothing to do with dehydration
Or your nutrition.
or your nutrition. It is fatigue. That's the biggest thing that's in the literature and the biggest thing that we found. If I fatigue a muscle and I do it over and over again, I can induce cramping. And then number two, if I put the muscle in certain positions and I take out its support systems, I can cause the muscle to cramp. And it replicates those things that those people experience. And then you can do very specific things to cause the muscle to quit cramping. But to go back, if you're getting cramping at the bottom of your foot, it's not your fascia.
Fair enough.
Right?
All right. What's sign number 2? It's the FDB.
Pain with resistive toe flexion. So
What is that?
toe flexion. Can I see your foot?
No. You could use my fingers.
I'll do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Imagine this is a foot. Now, what I'll do is I'll have the person curl their toes down, and then I grab them and I pull up really hard, and the muscle
Resisted toe flexion. I do that
Yes.
for my wrist.
the flexor brevis basically comes in and it hooks onto your toes, and then it attaches at your heel. When I grab and I pull, I'm resisting that. It's once again, it's showing that it's a muscle, not a passive structure.
Okay. And we just said like it seems like that's a pretty easy test. You could probably do it on yourself.
You absolutely can. You cross your leg, you grab your toes, try to straighten them out, and just be careful with it because with that position actually will induce a cramp. And once again, if you cause cramping really easily in the bottom of your foot, it's not the plantar fascia. You need to, at a minimum, you have to rule out the muscle before you start to go down this plantar fascial mindset.
Okay. That's number 2. What's number 3?
Number 3 is actually related to how you walk. If you remember, there's different ways that we can break up how people walk, and then that'll tell us what things should be happening during walking. I'll just say them real quick. So you have initial contact, that's when your heel first hits the ground. You have loading response, which is when your whole foot goes flat. Mid stance, which is when all of your body weight now is on the reference leg. So let's say we're looking at your left leg as the reference leg. So your left leg, your left foot is all the way down and the other side's off. It's mid stance. Terminal stance is when your heel starts to rise and the other leg's about to hit the ground. Pre-swing is when your foot's getting set up to transfer weight onto the other side. Then you have initial swing, mid-swing, and terminal swing. At every one of those phases, there's certain things that have to happen. With the flexor brevis, one of the key things is that it really gets loaded heavily at mid stance and into terminal stance, which is when most people will complain of pain. The plantar fascia actually gets mostly loaded in a tension event in pre-swing.
Okay, so I mean that seems like a big one because it's just you're gonna have pain when walking, and it's more so on the heel strike because that's where it's first starting to get stretched.
Great question. Because both of them attach at the heel, that contact pressure that happens at initial contact can actually cause pain in both of them. So I kind of throw out it hurts right when the foot touches the ground, but if it hurts when, for example, if you balance on one leg and you feel the pain, then I'm leaning more towards the flexor brevis because that's when that muscle is going to be active.
Okay.
Right. Whereas, and when we think through these, it's anytime you do like a movement to be diagnostic, what you're looking for is being able to separate what load is happening to what structure. And within the foot, when we're talking about walking, the plantar fascia is going to be more loaded when we do what's called the windlass mechanism, which is when your toe gets fully extended. Your big toe gets fully extended. So if you're sitting there right now, if you take and you pull up your big toe, you'll see that your arch raises. That's the windlass mechanism. So it's going to get most loaded when your big toe goes into extension. And that's when you're going to have the most load to the plantar fascia. And it just means that most people don't complain of it in that time period, which once again leads me away from thinking it's the plantar fascia that's causing the pain.
You had mentioned something earlier that I'm just curious about. It seems like these two are very closely related. Is it the case where you can only have one of them, or if you have one of them, you have both of them?
You can have both, but I often think that there's a dominant one.
And it could be either.
It could be either. We
Okay.
call it, when you look at it in the literature, there's something called the conjunction fallacy. You ever heard of that?
Conjunction fallacy.
It's
I know
where
what those mean independently.
all it means is that it's more likely if you have an event, if you have like we have an injury, right? It's more likely that it's one of them Like, so for example, it's more likely that it's FDB than it's FDB and plantar fasciitis. And it's what that means is it's because one is a subset of the other.
Okay.
So it's always more likely if you're looking at something, you want to work through singular causes first, just because of that fallacy, in my opinion, because you don't want to assume it's everything. It's more likely that it's one of them than it is for it to be both of them.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay. Number 4.
Okay, number 4, there's a very specific test called the Flexor Digitorum Brevis test that I find really useful. It combines some of the ideas that we've already done. The first thing that you do is you basically take the foot and you fully flex the toes back. And what that does is it causes the plantar fascia to become really taut. So it's the most superficial structure. So I'm able to push on the plantar fascia and it's covering the FDB. So I'm actually not getting really any pressure on the flexor digitorum brevis. I'm getting it most on the plantar fascia. And then what I do is I slacken the plantar fascia and I push in the exact same place and it becomes exquisitely tender. Then it starts to point once again towards the FDB. This one, it's useful and it's already starting to confirm where we're going down. But I will find where it may still be, in my opinion, flexor digitorum brevis, and you have pain with both of them.
And are a lot of people that you're seeing about this coming in saying, like, I've got plantar fasciitis and I need help?
There's no one that comes in saying it's flexor digitorum brevis. They only say it's plantar fasciitis. I mean, plantar fasciitis is such a common diagnosis that even obvious things where it's not that, like stress fractures or a true and obvious fat pad injury, those aren't even considered. Anything in the heel is typically being diagnosed as a plantar fasciopathy or plantar fasciitis, to the point where it's just it's like really not even thoughtful. I don't trust the diagnosis anymore, but you only hear one diagnosis.
Alrighty. So another kind of easy DIY test. If you're feeling pain with the resisted toe flexion, go see another physical therapist.
Yeah, or
Or tell them about the
podiatrist.
FDB.
What's interesting is it's most often I don't have for mine. It's most of these diagnoses are happening from either a podiatrist or a surgeon, an orthosurgeon.
Will they suggest surgery?
Oftentimes they'll be getting injections, like cortisone injections. Don't get a cortisone injection in your plantar fascia. It degrades the health of the fascia and actually will lead to further rupturing. So if you already have a tear, it doesn't make sense to do that. But also the loads that you have down that you're doing on your foot, they're so high that if you compromise the integrity of the tendon or the fascia, you're going to tear the muscle more or just destroy the foot. And I've actually even gotten cortisone caused atrophy in the bottom of the foot. I mean, the amount of issues I've had with pretty wild and non-thoughtful injections in the foot is upsetting.
Sorry that you're so
Yeah.
upset by that.
It's upsetting. I find it in the people who also get the pretty severe nerve pain. They'll also be getting it. And what I find is that they've had long history of this injury, and they'll get dramatic atrophy in the muscle. So the muscle that's most important for stabilizing the foot is lost its strength. And those are the individuals who find that they can only wear specific shoes. Like the shoe almost becomes almost becomes their lifeline to
Like
be able
necessary to,
yeah, it's a crutch. It's no longer a tool. It's a crutch that allows them to walk. These are the individuals that are afraid to walk barefoot. And I've seen it for like pro level athletes where this has happened, but you see it in everybody. You see in the day to day where they're told you're never supposed to walk barefoot, or we'll hear in Tucson that you shouldn't walk on the tile barefoot because it's too hard. Your foot can handle most terrains. It's ridiculous. If you can't, it means that your foot's not been managed well.
Okay. Next, we're going to jump into pain after exercise.
Pain
Number
after
5.
exercise, I look at it from a tendon component. So it'll present like a tendon injury or a muscle injury where you feel you'll have a reduction in symptoms and then with activity, and then it will come back later. And it presents either with increased cramping. So you'll start to notice cramping more afterwards, that feeling of like the tight foot on the bottom, or they'll have an actual increase in pain. It's behaving like a tendon injury.
I feel like maybe I had a little bit of that when I was doing some of my runs with my uncomfortable shoes, but
I love it. I
not,
did get
not
advice that
terribly.
you should start running outside.
Oh, it's so hot out there, though.
It's murder.
Yeah,
hot. I love that.
yeah. And I don't like running at 5 o'clock in the morning, nor do I like running at all. But trying to keep myself slightly healthier. But I don't think that's something you would normally think about with plantar fasciitis or any other foot injury is cramping after exercise.
It's very, very common. And if it's the flexor torn brevis, it's on the bottom of your foot, kind of midfoot, you'll notice it.
Okay. What is number 6? I'm seeing it as holes in your footbed.
Yeah.
Toe blisters.
All right.
It's terrible.
If you're sitting at home, I want you to do two things if you have this issue. The first one is to take whatever shoe you wear most commonly and pull out the footbed. The footbed is
like the insole?
The insole.
Oh my. I continue, but I'll tell you about my insoles after this.
In a second. What happens is I will look at where the 5 toes push down and you'll see holes have developed. And that indicates that you're using your toes for stability, using it for grabbing, and that you're already probably predisposed to cramping and having a dysfunctional flexor torn brevis, abductor hallucis, and abductor digiti minimi. You'll have all of those will be showing signs of it, but you look to see if there's holes and then look at the bottoms of your toes and you'll see that you have callus formation. And so it's what we're looking for in this one is you're showing a dysfunction of overusing your toes for gripping, which predisposes you to injuring the flexor digitorum brevis.
I 100% have this.
Okay.
So I recently bought some fancy insoles that after researching they don't actually work, but whatever, I've got them in there. They're supposed to increase your vertical by like
which ones did you get?
Victory insoles. So
okay.
They're huge in social media right now for runners, for all athletes.
Okay.
They're a carbon fiber insole that are, they do all these tests where they fling them and they fly up 10 feet in the air. Once again, all the research that I've seen say that they're kind of BS.
We're going to come back to that in a second.
Yeah, that said, like, they're relatively comfortable. They're not terrible. But when I pulled my insoles out of the shoes that I played volleyball in, like, basically the whole toe area was gone. Yeah. Like, there were massive holes all across all of them.
Yeah, that's an issue.
Like, I've just been, using the midsole of my actual shoe rather than the insole itself, which, yeah, I didn't know that could be causation for different foot injuries.
We treat our feet as if they're stupid, unathletic blocks. And what happens is that we have a humongous industry based around the idea that your foot is dysfunctional and can't handle the load that you're going to be putting through it. Right. And there's a huge industry that's basically been developed that drives us to having completely unathletic, non-dexterous, poorly performing feet. And my thoughts on that are, I mean, there's a lot of issues around it. But what is fascinating is it drives you into a pain syndrome, it drives you into different injuries, but it also reduces your athletic ability. Your posterior tibialis is more important for controlling your rate of pronation and controlling force absorption than your flexor digitorum longus, flexor digitorum brevis, all these other muscles that also produce force. And the shoes, I think, predispose some of this dysfunction that we see and this idea that your foot is just this block. These different muscles, the tendons, all of these things, how your foot functions, they function better if you master the dexterity and the movement. Like imagine if you had to perform volleyball and you had just a mitt wrapped around your hand at all times. And if you think about how poorly your hand would function with that, you're basically doing that all the time. And I'm not saying that you need to get rid of all your shoes, but what I am saying is that those things like the calluses on the bottom of your feet, the fact that you're digging the holes with your toes, you're creating a dysfunctional foot that may not inhibit you right now, but I do think it'll inhibit you later. It'll limit where you can go. But then at the end of the day, I also think it's actually adversely affecting your athletic performance. I definitely think that with runners.
You're wearing those cool toe shoes right now.
I do.
That have your toes sticking out.
No, I'm a Van guy. I love Vans. The idea is that the shoe doesn't matter. You should find a shoe that becomes a training aid or something that pushes your performance. It shouldn't be a mask that makes it so your foot continually performs worse. That's a crutch, and crutches are useful in the short term, but they're not useful in the long term. Individuals who go down a carbon plate pathway, it's great if you're doing it for a performance, like a training aid or a performance performance booster later on. But if you're having to wear it because your big toe gets painful or you develop midfoot pain without it, like we now know, because he said a few times he has pain on the top of a foot. I already have a working thought process of what's happening based off his toes having to dig in more. We know that he's not actually absorbing force as well as he should, and he's not transferring force well through his midfoot, and his shoes probably compensating and masking some components of that, which we'll break apart now that I've heard some of the things he's saying. But to go back to the big thing with the Flexor Brevis, if you are digging your toes in and you have calluses on the bottom of your foot, or if you start to notice that you're getting blisters there, this is also common when people start to lose toenails. That loss of toenails is a sign that you're using the toes in the way I'm describing, which is unhealthy and also start to point towards a dysfunctional flexor torn brevis, not a plantar fascia issue.
I've been blowing through my insoles for more than 20 years. I remember when I was in high school, I would like tape them back together so that I still had a full
Oh,
insole. Yeah.
that's interesting.
And I would get terrible blisters, but sometime, probably 19 years ago, shortly after I got some of the worst ones, I just started wearing 2 pairs of socks and it has solved it for the rest of my life. So
Last
on
one?
to the last one.
Okay. Abnormal walking style. When you get pain is at mid stands and terminal stands. What we'll find is that individuals will actually try to avoid those. You'll try to get out of mid stands faster, or you'll shorten your stride so you're dealing with less forces going through your foot. This one, this one's big because it's avoidance of the phases of gait that hurt you, and they don't avoid pre-swing, which is when plantar fascia is going to be the most loaded.
So they're just walking awkwardly
They're
to
walking
try and avoid the
awkwardly.
pain.
Yep, you'll see them walk on their, almost on their toe, but you'll see that they're doing things that basically avoid that muscle from being loaded, but they don't avoid the ones that load the plantar fascia.
And we know that's not a good idea because you're probably going to injure something else, your knee, your ankle, or whatever it might be.
You've got it long term. It's a horrible decision, but it's again another one that if they're avoiding phases that indicate that muscle, but not the plantar fascia, you're starting to get, once again, these are all things that no one of them by themselves says it's plantar fascia, but all together they start to make a pretty compelling case.
Okay. Next, we wanted to talk about some of the misleading symptoms.
The big idea on this is that there are certain things that people will use to rule in plantar fascia, but it doesn't actually differentiate the two structures. So morning pain can be present on both the plantar fasciitis and it can be present with a flexor torn brevis. And the idea is that you don't want to use something to differentiate a diagnosis that's actually present for both of them.
So that's literally just like with your first steps in the morning, your foot is hurting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what morning pain is? It's
Morning pain,
literal.
yeah. When somebody gets out of the most common way that people will describe this pain is that they'll wake up in the morning, think everything's feeling fine. They step on their foot, and it feels like it's either tearing in half or incredibly painful. And then after about 5 minutes of moving on it, the symptoms go away. What I'm saying is that does not differentiate plantar fasciitis from a flexor torn brevis tendinopathy, and meaning it could be either of them at that point. And if you go back to the 7 things we just went through, that'll give you a better clinical picture. Same thing with treatments like the ice spot on the bottom end. That will honestly could provide temporary relief to both structures. It also doesn't differentiate. What you want is to use whenever you're going through anything for getting a differential. You want to provide a treatment that then further supports that differentiation between the two diagnoses.
Okay, so say you've gotten there in terms of the treatment implications. What do you do next?
I think that's going to be a good one for us to even go down further because the treatment implications are actually significant and could be their own podcast, which I think we hit next time on how you actually treat when these injuries do present.
Okay, what are some of the things we should stop doing? I know one of your favorite things is to stretch it.
I I don't. Oh my God.
How many times in this podcast?
I'm going to hit it over and over again. It's the issue with this is it's not a muscle length issue. Most often when somebody says that they have tightness, it's because that muscle's not doing a great job. So stretching it, if anything, it's going to make it feel worse long term. But in the short term, it's going to mask the dysfunction that's happening. Stretching it will turn off an active cramp. I'm okay with that. But using it to try to gain length, it's just the opposite of what that muscle needs. That muscle needs other muscles to help support what its activity is, which is controlling the rate of pronation and supporting the medial longitudinal arch. There's a whole bunch of exercises that we'll get into that will do that for you. The stretching is not one of them. The second thing is doing things like the Strasbourg sock or other long static holds of it. I know some people love it, but what I find, they love it because it will reduce pain. But what I find is it creates a vulnerability and a level of recurrence in this injury that I don't think is helpful.
Makes it feel better, but doesn't actually solve the
Doesn't
problem.
actually solve the problem. Some people have had really good results with it, but what I think happens is they reduce their activity at the same time. So they get some improvement, some symptom stabilization, but they often never get back to the activity they were doing before. The other big issue with it is I find that it drives nerve injuries. So people will get put into these tension positions for a long period of time. And so some of the worst cases I've ever had to work with have been people who did not have the nerve pain to start with, but they started using the Strasbourg sock and then got like a back irritation or something else, and it dramatically made their case more difficult. I mean, dramatically more difficult. And then that's when I got to see them for the first time. It's frustrating because the nerve, I think, is often underdiagnosed with plantar heel pain. It makes it very difficult to rehab it because you're walking on the nerve. It just throws an extra layer of difficulty in the rehab situation. So stretching's the biggest one. The other one I really dislike is I don't like marble pickups or towel pickups because it actually puts your foot in the cramp position, which is kind of silly. Like if you
Right.
think about it,
If it hurts, don't do it.
yes, don't do it. And it will strengthen the muscle, but it strengthens it in a dysfunctional pattern. We'll show you some other ones in our next podcast on how to actually fire the flexor torn brevis in a healthy way, gets back to coordination and dexterity without driving cramping.
Footwear choices are also one of these implications.
What I find is most helpful in this one is going to be anything that helps you navigate mid stance and terminal stance better. So there can be a few of them, but the biggest one is it should just feel really comfortable on your foot. I really also find that if the shoe is too tight, it can drive that kind of cramping dysfunctional pattern in the foot. The big thing is this is a situation where I wouldn't trust a marketing ad on Facebook on this is the shoe to use or this is the thing to buy. I would actually go to a store where you can actually try the shoes on, see that they feel comfortable and work really well and don't induce some of the symptoms that you're experiencing.
So like custom fit orthotics.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying custom orthotics. This is not one. I don't think custom orthotics are huge on this. Sometimes a medial posting to the heel will make it so your posterior tibialis tendon, I'm going way too in depth on this, but your posterior tibialis tendon will become more functional, which will reduce some of the load to the flexor torn brevis. So sometimes custom orthotics will work, but it's completely overkill, and oftentimes they're targeting to me the wrong tissue, which would be like the plantar fascia, not the flexor torn brevis.
I like a nice pair of J's.
What's that?
Jordans.
Oh, how much are Jordans?
Well, it depends.
So I thought,
Yeah.
good Lord.
I've gotten some of mine on eBay for like $40 though.
Too expensive. $40.
$40? Yeah,
Unacceptable.
I guess you can get that. It's like two for 40. So
That is like the best thing. You go there, they're like, yeah, we'll actually throw in this eighth pair for no charge.
I know I've gone up to the Vans outlet and it's just like, well, you'll get 6 pairs for $1. Like,
God,
oh,
I love
okay,
Vans.
this is
They
great.
look they
Very
look
cool. And then kind of lastly on this topic is T sign. You can kind of check it after exercise.
Yes, check it all the time. This is one that you should be able to have a rapid, immediate response on. Now, if we get a really nasty case, we'll actually tape it to doing a taping one that we actually developed here at Smith Performance Center, and we'll show that in our next episode. But you can check this all the time, and if you can feel like you can pull a cramp on, then you can do the home plan or do some of the exercise we're about to show you. But this is one that's very responsive to treatment as long as you catch it early. But the easiest one is digging your toes down. If that causes it to feel painful or cramp, that's a bad sign. And if you feel it with walking. So there's a lot of really easy ways to test it, but walking pain at midstance, resisted flexor torn brevis testing, or palpating the spot on the bottom of the foot, which all of these we'll get into in our next episode.
Alrighty. You wanted me to play devil's advocate here. You've
I
said that
did.
there's a lot of, I guess, counterpoints in the plantar fasciitis world in terms of misdiagnosis and what folks think are really happening. So
I have argued this professionally with some of my other professional colleagues, and I'm very comfortable with the pushback I've gotten on it. I'm pretty forward in my opinion on it, but I believe my thought process on it, clinically produces the best results. And I think it's only a matter of time before the research catches up.
And you've got some published articles on this, right?
I have one that's on how the tape that we developed, how that works and how long it lasts for. Not, that's actually one of them. I had an injury to my head in 2018.
So he taped his foot.
To tape my foot for, but led me to pull out of some of the research that we were starting to develop for plantar intrinsic pain. And I haven't gone back to it at this point, but there is some literature now that's showing some of the thought processes around how this can cause pain. There's also some support when you go and you look at some of the articles on inducing pain in the flexor digitorum brevis, and it will replicate some of the pain that people will feel in the bottom of their foot. But it is a fair criticism that this has not been researched to the level that plantar fascia has. I do think that the research that's been done on the plantar fascia has been in some ways biased and not complete in its own right. And I don't think some of the things that people commonly report have been considered within these research studies. Further, the outcomes with plantar heel pain is pathetic.
So you're not just making this all up?
I'm not making this all up. And the nice part is it's extremely testable. Number two, I'm also not arguing that you can't also have plantar fascia pain, but I do think you treat plantar fascia symptoms different than you would a muscle injury on the bottom of your foot. And when I have, because it does happen where you'll have both injuries, you'll have somebody who has like a partial rupture of the plantar fascia combined with a flexor digitorum brevis tendon injury. And if you treat one and then the other, you can see compounding improvement. Instead of just saying, it's plantar fascia, you'll see that there'll still be pain at midstance, for example. So there's different, to me, treatments for both things from my point of view and how we treat it that don't get caught if you just go for the plantar fascia.
All right. Next point. Is this like one of the rarest things in the world? Because I've never heard of it before.
It is extremely common. And like I said, I think that the plantar fascia gets implicated, which is considered probably the most common. I mean, you've heard of plantar fasciitis. And if you think of 90% of those cases being flexor digitorum brevis, which I think they are, it's a very common problem.
Leads to the very easy next one. What if it's both?
What if it's both? It means that you have to treat them in a different way. So, for example, you would have to manage pre-swing. You would have to help reduce load to this fascial structure. You want to treat it like a fascial injury, and you would want to make sure you give it enough time to heal and treat the area where the plantar fascia has been injured. That absolutely can happen, but then you would also treat the muscle and the tendon of flexor digitorum brevis as well. And I think the big thing on those is there is a different strategy, and we can hit both.
Next one would be on imaging. So I've heard that with PF, you can kind of see the difference in the plantar fascia. So what about imaging?
The big thing is that you can have a dysfunctional plantar fascia without pain. So one of the ways that you can look at it is how do we catch things that are false positives versus false negatives? And we look at it, we consider it called diagnostic accuracy. You can have a thickened plantar fascia. You can also even have a torn plantar fascia with no symptoms. The issue with that, and whenever I hear that, is that it's normal to have some level of degeneration to this structure. And it's also normal for there to sometimes be thickening inside the plantar fascia. And it has to be tightly related to the exam that's being found. So there is absolutely evidence and things that people will look at that I can understand how you get to a plantar fasciitis diagnosis. I don't think it's enough just to look at imaging. You have to look at both the clinical exam and imaging if you have it available. Number two, the common one that we heard, which has kind of lost favor in the literature, is a heel spur syndrome, where people will get imaging and then it'll show this sharp edge to the calcaneus. And it'll be thought that that actual sharp edge is like hurting the muscle or hurting the tendon. And it's, in my thought process, it's not. It's not. That bone is completely enveloped in muscle and this like thick structure around it. It's not like a knife is being stabbed into the foot. And so it's one of those terms that it's not actually accurate for actually what's actually happening. The flexor digitorum brevis is actually pulling on the bone and actually causing that change. It's kind of like if you look at the front of people who've had Osgood slaughter, you'll see this bump where the tendon has pulled so hard from your patellar tendon that the bone is backfilled and you have like a larger bump over your tibial tuberosity. Our bone is reactive to the forces that go through it. And if you're somebody who has an overdeveloped FDB, I actually say it would give me more confidence in my diagnosis is the stronger your flexor torn brevis is, the more likely you are to have changes to the bone structure at the heel. And that'll make it look like you have a hook heel spur syndrome. I think it's just a mistake on actually what's happening and not actually the diagnosis.
Alrighty. This all sounds somewhat anecdotal. Where's the data?
To me, the data is coming. We've done some work looking at from a case study perspective. But it's totally right. I think this is one where clinical findings are absolutely outpacing the research. The second big part is I don't think that there's a significant product that can be advertised from the same way that you can with your thing like shoes and orthotics and all that stuff that's been built around the plantar fascia. So I think there's a huge economic model that supports us continuing to view plantar fascia as the primary injury. But no, I definitely would say that it's not so much anecdotal, but it is a clinically driven thought process.
Okay. Now let's say I treat the FDB. How do I know that that's really what I'm dealing with?
Your symptoms should improve, and they should improve fairly dramatically. And there's some other things that we'll do in the next episode where it shows how we confirm the diagnosis, so it's not just out there with us guessing.
And what's the timeline?
I mean, if it's the FDB, we should be able to see an improvement within the first session, and we should be able to develop a system that gets you to feel and move better. Within a month, you should have your own management of it pretty well under control. But if it's been going on for a long time and there's nerve as well, this can easily last a year, where you have a higher irritation, but you should be able to manage it by yourself within a month, and it won't be limiting your day to day, but it can take a long time.
Cool. Any closing thoughts?
No, what I would say is that what I just learned from this too is we gotta dive into cramping.
Cramping to come in a future episode.
Yeah, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about how to rehab this in the next episode.
Very cool. So if you've got some heel pain or you've been diagnosed with plantar fasciitis, let us know. Craig loves talking about feet.
I love me some feet.
We also will have an article up on pastyourprime.com that will go over some of these topics. So feel free to check that out. Yeah, if your doctor says it's PF, it doesn't mean they're right.
Doesn't mean they're right, and we would love to use you as a case study.
Fantastic. All right, like, comment, subscribe, follow, share. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube,
everywhere.
Pastyourprime.com. Thanks for checking us out, and we'll see you on the next one.
PYP, baby.
Peace.